Welcome to episode 7 of West Meets East. Sorry for the delay, but I've been focusing on my other social medias where they have shorter clips. These longer clips take longer. I'm going to start getting into the whole big meat of any relationship, and that is communication. Most couples who struggle, usually it's because they suffer for a lack of communication. And when you're dating someone from another culture and another language, communication is even more important because it's twice as difficult. When I first moved to Asia, I didn't have any parameters in place, but one of the things that I quickly learned was that I couldn't really date anybody that didn't speak fairly good English, because it was just so difficult to communicate. It's hard enough to communicate with somebody who fully speaks your language. It's doubly hard to communicate with somebody who barely speaks your language. So I remember dating this Thai guy, not for very long. I basically had to use Google Translate, and that was even before Google Translate was as good as it is today, to be able to talk to him. And, it just resulted in a lot of awkward silences. We'd be at dinner and, just kind of staring at each other because it was difficult to communicate with him. And that was true in several other potential relationships I had. Because for me, as you can tell, I like to talk, and I tend to talk fast and quickly. I'm a New Yorker. And so when you're living overseas and English is not predominant, it really impedes your rate of speech, and it also impedes my level of vocabulary. When we were living in Hoi An, most of our friends were Vietnamese, and some of them had better English than others. But even the ones that had the best English had limited vocabulary, as does my husband. English is not particularly hard grammatically, but what makes it difficult, and I used to teach English as a second language, is that we have so many words, so many vocabulary words that mean exactly the same thing. And each of them has a sort of subtle different meaning, but you could pretty much say everything in English in very, very simple, basic terms. And when I'm living in Asia, that's how I have to speak. I have to slow my speech down, and I have to choose first or second grade level vocabulary words. And it's a very conscious way of speaking, and that can become exhausting. So much so that when I actually would run into a native tourist speaker, it was like all the vocabulary words that I was holding inside me come spilling out like vomit. And I find myself talking 10 times faster than I normally talk, using vocabulary words that I can't say normally, because it's like pressure in a hose being released. And, I've been with Hui now 9 years, and even now I have to always be aware of what vocabulary words I'm using with him, because otherwise it will increase the chance of miscommunication. And frequently that's what our disagreements are about, because though he likes to say he understands what I'm saying, I'd say on a good day, 70% is what he's understanding. And I always have to make sure he's not on his phone, or he's not distracted, or he's not doing something else if I need to convey some really important information, because it will just get lost. And, that ends up being in a fight. Well, I told you that. No, you didn't. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. Yeah. And so if you're going to enter into a relationship with someone, the level of language ability needs to be fairly equal. Now, of course, you're all thinking, well, why don't you learn how to speak Vietnamese? And I would love to learn how to speak Vietnamese, but Vietnamese is an incredibly difficult language. I'd say it's even more difficult than Mandarin, um, because of the tones. Um, Grammar-wise, Vietnamese is pretty easy, but tone-wise, there's 7 or 8 commonly used tones in Vietnamese. And for somebody like myself, I can't hear those tones. So, I don't know if it's an up tone, a down tone, a flat tone, an up down tone. You know, it all sounds the same. And so, even if I do a close proximity to the word, because of my accent and because I'm not hitting the tones 100%, most Vietnamese people can't understand what I'm saying. Fortunately, since it does use Roman characters, it's fairly easy to read. So now I can actually read signs in Vietnam and I can read menus in Vietnam. But, if you look at those words, there's all these little accent marks on top of them. I have no idea what they mean. I just need to sit down one day and have somebody explain to me what those accent marks are. I mean, some of them are obvious, the up and the down and the up down, but then there's like this U with a period, and I was like, what the hell is that? So, I would love to be able to speak my husband's language, and I know all the onus and pressure is on him to speak my language, but it makes any relationship difficult. And it's just, I just want to say that be careful when you begin to date somebody whose primary language is not your own, because so many of the subtleties of language will be lost. And those subtleties is what results in arguments and fights. So communication is that's just one part of my talk on communication, because it's so essential to all relationships. Anyway, follow me on TikTok and on Instagram. That's where I'm trying to build followers, and would appreciate if you continue to like and subscribe and share. And as always, I look forward to talking to you guys again in the near future.